6 a.m. that come 7 or thereabout, because it's 30 minutes past 7, we shall be having a conversation with some very renowned authors and writers and personalities in as far as literary works are concerned. I will be engaging doctors of philosophy this morning, and they have a wealth of experience, knowledge, and intelligence when it comes to matters writing, reading, and most especially, we shall also do this right here, this book. It's called Social Media and Political Campaigns in Kenya. So we shall be engaging you on a book review on this particular text. We just came from a general election, and social media was a tool that was used very much so during the campaigns. Was it effective? Was it not? What lessons can we draw from this particular book that are going to inform the decisions we make as far as social media and political campaigns in Kenya is concerned? You know the drill by now. The hashtag is Good Morning Kenya on Twitter, and 22162 is our SMS line. Begin with the initials GMK. My name is Samuel Njoroge, and with pleasure I introduce three gentlemen who will be in my panel this morning. I'd like to begin with my immediate right. I've got Dr. John Ndavula, who is the author of Social Media and Political Campaigns in Kenya. Dr. Ndavula, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sammy.
A pleasure to have you. I'll go to the middle, and we've got Rev.Dr. James Tengatenga. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Welcome to the program. And straight ahead, I've got Dr. R.S. Wafula, who is a publisher, Borderless Press, and president of the Post-Colonial Networks. Karibu sana.
Thank you, sir.
Before we even get too deep into a discussion this morning, I know your profiles are vast, but I would like maybe to give you each a minute to tell us a little bit about yourselves. And I would like to begin with you, Dr. Tengatenga.
Well, I'm a retired Anglican bishop from Malawi, and I now teach at the University of the South in Tennessee in the USA, where I teach mission studies and global Anglican studies. Pretty much excited about writing and encouraging others to write and developing writing culture, but also particularly the matter of writing from an African perspective and hopefully using African idiom as an addition to discourse in the world, because most of the writing and reading is dominated by Western idiom and Western thought. So that's my passion, and that's what I'm involved in this, what we call knowledge activism.
Knowledge activism.
And the democratization of the processes of the dissemination of that knowledge.
Great, and welcome to the program. Dr. Wafula, coming to you. A bit about yourself.
Thank you. I am R.S. Wafula. I reside in the U.S. at the moment. Graduated with a PhD from there at Drew University. And after graduating with a PhD, I went on to teach 4 years in different colleges. And most recently, I have focused on building up Borderless Press and doing the work at Post-Colonial Networks. And just briefly to talk about those two organizations. So Post-Colonial Networks has, Bishop Tengatenga has said, is a social activist organization. And its activism has to do with the democratization of knowledge. And we come to the table with the understanding that when you compare the production of academic and even popular books among the continents, Africa is really underperforming. It only contributes 2% of the world literary writing.
Yes.
And so for us, we think that's an injustice, because books tell a story. And that means the African story is only 2% of the world stories. And we want to change that. And so we have started privileging the production and publication of books by African authors, both in the academic world and in the popular world, in order to kind of redress that problem.
Absolutely. Dr. Ndavula, over to you.
Thank you, Sami. I'm John Ndavula from St. Paul's University. I'm the head of Department of Communication Studies, and I'm also a lecturer in the same department. And my major area of teaching is ICTs, or Information and Communication Technologies.
Yes.
So that's what I'm passionate about. Now, apart from teaching, I'm also a writer with my new book published.
Yes.
But I'm also a creative writer. I write short stories, novellas for kids. So I've been writing for a while now. But so that's my passion, you know, teaching, writing, and also mentoring students.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you taught one right here. And you taught one right here, my lecturer, while I was at St. Paul's University. Dr. Tengatenga, writing from an African perspective, a lot has been said by other people when it comes to the African story. What exactly do we lack in terms of capacity so that we're able to tell our own stories?
To be honest with you, we lack nothing except motivation and self-belief. Because for the most time, for the longest time, since Europeanization of our continent, we have felt like we were not adequate enough to tell our story. And when we told our story, we want to tell it the way the Mzungu would tell me how to tell it.
Yeah.
Instead of me telling it the way I would like to tell it, and be confident that in telling it my way, I am contributing to knowledge. Not only my knowledge, my people's knowledge, but even the Mzungu's knowledge, because he has only a view of the world from where he stands.
Yes.
Because you speak from where you stand. And most of it, especially if you're a creative writer, you speak from the heart. And your heart is where you are. Or as we say in our place, in some of the Malawian wisdom, is that no one can bewitch me unless they know where my navel was hidden. And there's only one person who knows where that is.
Yes.
And that's me. I can speak about my soul and about my soul. And being a religious person like myself, then also, how do I speak faith to the world from an African perspective? And is religion, especially being a Christian, only spoken about and spoken of from a Western point of view, and only in the English idiom? By that I mean, it's not just the stringing of words in English, but as you know, language is more complicated than just the sentences that they are.
Yes.
So being able to communicate in that style, that is mine. And so I say we lack nothing except motivation and self-belief.
And motivation and self-belief, things that are very personal, because motivation can only come from within, self-belief can only be inspired by someone or oneself. But again, Dr. Wafula, rather, you cite a very interesting piece of statistic that 2% of the world's literal works come from Africa. I'm just trying to think, 2% is very minimal. Right. Very, very minimal. But then you dedicate yourself to this course of knowledge activism to see whether we can push the numbers. We can try and increase that. Where then do we begin?
I think we begin from, what Dr. Tengatenga is saying, which is to encourage people to have a belief in themselves. To be able to know that they can do it.
Absolutely.
You know, when you get you get up to a place where you have been made to believe you can't do something for so long, you have that self-doubt. And so what we have begun doing, at least from our press, is to organize conferences where we begin encouraging people who have the capacity to write to be able to do so. Giving them the reason why it's important to write.
Right.
And that has been very helpful.
Absolutely. Very, very helpful. I can see a wonderful lady. Her name is Skita, and she'd like to serve us some water. Don't shy away, Skita. Just come right through. The water is very much necessary for this discussion. So just come right along. There you have it. She's one of our team members, by the way, and she does an amazing job right here on Good Morning Kenya. Thank you so much, Skita. Your 30 seconds of fame. Your 30 seconds of fame. So before Skita brought us the water,
yes,
you were saying something.
Yes. So I was saying to encourage one another and motivate one another. It's a very key piece, because there are people who have talent that is lying underdeveloped. And oftentimes when it comes to literary publishing, the fact that most publishing companies, and what in quotes they call reputable publishing companies, are all either in Europe or in the US. And so many of the people who have the talent and the capacity to write have no idea where to start. They have no idea who I can begin working with.
Yes.
So apart from motivating people, we become this channel of letting people know the outlets. Who do you contact? And we educate people about that. The other place to be able to begin is kind of like teasing out much of the scholarship, especially in the academic world. By the time somebody graduates with a PhD or a master's degree, part of that process has to do with writing a book proposal or a research proposal. Now, oftentimes, once that research proposal is written, it is deposited in libraries and in schools where people did those programs, and that's the end of the story. And nobody ever gets to read that. And so we kind of tease them out by telling these authors who are authors without publication that, hey, bring out that which you deposited in the university you graduated, and let's begin working with you to kind of publish it and put that knowledge out there. So those, among other things, are places, I think, to answer your question, the place to begin.
The place to begin.
Yep.
And we're privileged to have one of those authors who were motivated enough, inspired enough, and they were able to pick up courage and do a book. And this is Social Media and Political Campaigns in Kenya. Yes. I'm talking about Dr. Ndavula, who's seated right next to me. Your experience coming up with this text, what can you tell us about it?
Okay, thank you for that. Actually, before I wrote this book, I had done 5 other books for use in schools and colleges.
Yes.
But the process wasn't the same. You know, oftentimes I would research on a book, write it, then take it to a publisher, and they would accept it wholesomely. So to some extent I was asking myself, you know, what are my weaknesses in terms of writing and so on. But when I attended one of the conferences, which the Borderless Press and Post-Colonial Networks hosted for us as, you know, just young graduates with PhD, and I listened to their story about how to publish, how to get your work peer-reviewed by scholars in your field, so that they add to, you know, some chapters here, some chapters there, you know, take this out, put this in. I thought that was very, very interesting, and I jumped on the opportunity because I knew I had to publish my work, my doctoral thesis, because it takes a lot of time, you know.
Sure it does.
A lot of research. You have your committee which pokes holes into your work and you make it better. And the practice that as I had seen with other scholars is they would almost publish their thesis verbatim, you know, not breaking it down in a language that the common mwananchi would understand, or people who are not necessarily your dissertation committee. So the process of writing this book was very, very interesting and enriching, because my work went through peer reviews both here locally, you know, in my field, and also abroad, and I was able to incorporate all the suggestions that they gave me. And apart from that, I was also lucky to get a writing residency with the post-colonial networks. And I spent some time in Iowa, and it's a very beautiful place.
Yeah.
And very quiet.
Yes.
All snow. So I got some time just to sit back, use a good library, and complete the final draft of my book. So it was quite nice, yeah.
I dare ask you, is there something you could have done better when you look at this text?
At the moment, I would say not really, but remember, I write about social media or ICTs.
Yes.
And they're rapidly changing. Every time, we can't even keep up with the pace of the development of social networks.
And that
right?
was my concern.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you keep up now that you've started this?
So this book, actually, in my research, I focused on the 2013 elections in Kenya. But then 2017 has come. We're looking forward to 2022. So I know, of course, if I'm to do a second edition, then I'd have to incorporate, things like, fake news and, Cambridge Analytica,
yes.
This more recent developments. Yeah.
The new law that was just signed in by the president, and much, much more. Dr. Tengatenga, talking of self-inspiration and motivation, what then would you say is the beauty of the African story?
State the obvious. Is its color. I mean, I am black, brown, and that is a story in itself to be able to be told. Did God make a mistake? Did he make a mistake by creating me black? And how good is that? And how do I make sense of that? And how do I make sense when I meet, say, a Chinese person? Because I see the Chinese person through my eyes.
Yes.
And he sees me through his own eyes. And so when that interaction happens, it's the beginning of a story. Not only that, I mean, Africans are known about talking about their people. I belong somewhere. I am a child of so-and-so who is a child of so-and-so from such and such a clan, from such and such a tribe. And that tells your story. And in fact, if you've been attentive to South African ceremonies of different kinds, and before the person speaks or is introduced in what is the usual Western way, there's somebody who just rattles a poem of some kind.
Yeah.
And some people just think that's just poetry. It is not poetry. It's actually telling the story. James Tengatenga, the son of the Tengatengas, who is part of the Nguni people, whose grandfather fought, whose grandfather migrated from the south through the Mfekane, and then somebody will ask me, what's Mfekane? Are you trying to bite your tongue? No. And at that moment, I begin to tell them about the dispersion of the people from Southern Africa coming all the way back up. And I think, as far as here, I think we know most likely in Tanzania, you have Ngonis, in northern Malawi, central Malawi, but all coming down from the Shaka dispersion and so forth. So I'm beginning to tell the story of my people, how we migrated, how we populated, and how come I speak 6 languages in addition to some European languages. And it's related to all that travel. So that's beginning to tell your story, and then beginning to tell about it the way it was. And then history, and even our cultures, for those of us who have gone to school in the olden times, is that they were told by Western anthropologists who did a great job in uncovering some of our things and so forth. But there's always a blind spot when you're talking about somebody else. So how can I now tell my story and look at those anthropological studies and beginning to say, well, this was the shortcoming. This is where they lied about me. This is where they told an untruth. This is where they told a half-truth. And this is where they missed it completely.
Completely.
And so that's how I begin to tell my story. Depending on what field I'm doing it. Is it just for entertainment and education? And is it something seriously academic? So depending what platform I'm wanting to address, then that's the story.
Absolutely. And in the course of telling that story, as you rightfully say, there will be gaps here and there.
Yeah.
And they've got to be appreciated. But then again, in light of the fact that this initiative, even what we're trying to push this morning, has got a lot of democratization and activism attached to it, how do we reconcile the extremes? Because they're there. How do we reconcile that?
The first part is by engaging.
Yeah.
I mean, beginning to tell my story. And if somebody has a question about that story, then that dialogue of their perception of it and my perception of it is the beginning of the process, because that interaction now begins to birth the new thing, that we think ought to come about. And there will always be extremes. I mean, a child of this land has taught us all that. Remember, Ngugi wa Thiong'o?
Yes.
He has taught the world. He has spoken in our mother tongue. And at one point, if you remember, he even said, I'm not going to write in English at all.
At all.
And started writing in Gikuyu. And a way of communicating that there is something I want to say here which I cannot say in the other language. And even if I say it in the other language, I won't be communicating what I'm wanting to say. But at the same time, you realize, well, if I do that, if I write in Gikuyu, to what extent is Gikuyu pervasive in the world? So who will hear my story? Who will understand my story? And I think you can see how then Ngugi goes back and forth in that, in saying, well, maybe I need to write again in English, yes, because then there is a universality that is in English. But I will write in English in a peculiar way that is particular to me as a son of the Kikuyus. And so there will be a Kikuyu sound in there. So you see, even in one person, those extremes exist.
Exactly.
So it's an accordion.
Absolutely.
And that's how music's produced.
Amazing. Amazing. Dr. Wafula, coming to you. The course that you began,
Yes.
and how far you've come.
Right.
The worry for Ndavula and others that are coming up is how sustainable is it? How do we make it sustainable so that 10, 20, 30 years down the line,
Right,
people can still benefit from the initiatives that you're making in as far as reading and writing is concerned?
Right. Several ways. One is to, being an activist, we like to talk and to seek every avenue to express the reasons why our story is important and why writing is important. And so one of the things that that's part of our program is to kind of conduct universities, not only in Kenya. We have had inroads in Uganda, and now we are planning to do that in Tanzania next year, hopefully, and other places. So to be able to tell the story and explain to people why coming out and being a part of the discourse of the world in terms of writing is important. Yeah. We hope we will raise a movement of people who will not only be concerned, but become a part of us. The other part of it is we kind of like mentor the people that begin to write through Borderless Press. So once Ndavula writes for us and he's co-opted into the movement, he's never going to leave. We make sure we put a very tight leash on him, and we ask him to continue telling the story in his world.
Are you going to leave?
And in his connections.
No, I'm good.
You're good. All right. Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah.
So now since we started, at least the first publication, writing from 2014, that was when we first put out got our first publication out. We have had all those people become a part of us in many ways, to kind of now, in their institutions where they teach and in all their social world, we encourage them to speak out. But one other thing that we do, we realize that we live in a globalized world, and it's important not only to think about our own local interests, but to know that we are interconnected. And that is what living in the US gives Bishop Tengatenga and I the privilege to kind of cross the Atlantic and so make networks with people who will understand why this is important. And so at the moment we have a couple of universities where we have told our story, and they are willing, as Dr. Ndavula was saying, to invite and partner with us and offer places where our African scholars can go write. So when anyone comes to write with us, and we realize in our conversations and our friendship that they are not able to write, maybe because of time or a good library, then we ask if they can find time. And we have had people fly to the US and spend a couple of months to write. So those partnerships out there become our avenues where we can take a scholar like John to Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, and he spends their time, writes. They offer him hospitality, they offer him a library, they offer him an office. And so we are expanding those connections. We hope in the near future we can go to Europe and places like that. So we generate a movement like that, so that even in the future, when we are not there, we still have many other people who now understand and will continue the story.
Absolutely.
And besides, you're looking at, we teach there, but when I'm trying to teach something African, who am I going to go to? What books am I going to use? I want to use an African book, a book by an African author. Because as a professor, I need the diversity of material.
Yes.
And also the sources that are from the particular places that I'm exposing the world to. So the more I use Ndavula's book in my class, or the more I use Wafula's book in my class, my students begin to know Ndavula, begin to know the stories of Ndavula. So I'm disseminating that information beyond simply a book that somebody's reading in the library. But because I'm using it in class, it becomes a textbook. But also because I'm using it as a textbook, someone is going to write a paper and is going to cite Ndavula. And somebody who is going to find that paper inspiring will also cite Ndavula.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, so that the dissemination goes on.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't only begin and end with those that have been converted to the cause, but also those who receive the fruit of the course.
Right.
As we share this material in class.
So what I gather is that when it comes to the writing and reading of the African story, two key things. One, the value of networking and tentacles of influence.
Yes.
Number two, it doesn't only settle with the authors encoding the story. There should be a deliberate attempt for other people to decode that very message and disseminate it as far and as wide as possible.
Yes.
Dr. Ndavula, coming to you. If I'm to take this book or make reference to this book or recommend it to someone, give me 3 key areas it would help me understand when it comes to social media and political campaigns.
Okay, thank you. First, this is a new study. You know, social media is a new phenomenon, especially in our politics. And then there's not much written about social media contextually. If you go abroad, you'd find so many books, you know, that address social media. But contextually, like in Kenya, I believe this is the first fully peer-reviewed book that talks about Kenya. So most of the time, it's like groundbreaking. You know, setting up a space where people can begin to communicate about this.
Yeah.
Now, secondly, political issues are very, very pertinent in a country, and we've seen through the election cycles we have had since 2007, 2013, and the kind of effect that has had in the society. And much of the blame has been blamed on ICTs, that they contribute towards, perhaps tension in the country and so on. So it's good to try and understand how social media then is deployed for politics. I believe that's the second reason.
Yeah.
And the third reason is, as Dr. Tengatenga has said, the African story is beautiful, right? So this is telling about technology from an African perspective, So what does it mean for us? How do we engage with it? Because you'd find that the way social media is used perhaps in European elections or elections in the US is not the same way, the same exact way we use it here. So it's so good to tell our story and to lay the basis. Like this book lays the basis of the story about ICTs or social media and politics in Kenya, and other people can build on that and develop it further.
Develop it further.
Yeah.
Dr. Tengatenga, what do you make of the statement, if you want to hide something from an African, put it in a book?
That's always a fascinating one. In fact, in some of our sessions, we almost begin with that line. Because I'll take a case in point of Wafula's book.
Yeah.
Wafula's book is published, and it costs, is it 80-something?
Yeah.
$80-something. How many Africans are going to buy a book that costs $80-something? Now, move to the US in my class, and of course I'll be assigning a number of books. And how many students can buy $80 books when they have a host of other courses to take and so forth? Yeah. So at the end of the day, that $80 book is hidden in a library. And because I'm not using it in my class, my students will not know that knowledge. Because I'm not citing it, and it's not being cited by others, it's hidden there. So again, the knowledge is not hidden in the library, but it's inaccessible for most of our people. I mean, how many libraries, even here in the city of Nairobi, would buy 10 copies of $80 books? So it just means the library in Nairobi will not have that copy.
Yeah.
So if the library in Nairobi does not have a copy of a book written by a Kenyan, we've hidden that knowledge. So it goes to the Library of Congress in the US, which will have it. And the African will not have access to that. So part of it is that things are in a book. And there is also, I think, a lie that we have told ourselves and believed, that the African does not read or cannot read. You only need to go to a funeral at home in the village, and the first thing your relatives will ask you is, did you bring the newspaper? Yeah. Or whatever tabloid they read. Because they're so hungry to read stuff. And in the end, they read tabloids, which are, of course, they have some information. But if you're looking for deep knowledge, you want it in a book. Now they can't even afford a book. So you've hidden the wisdom in a book. At least our people used to sing about it, used to dance it, used to speak poetry about it. And we no longer do that. The world has turned literally, and therefore put the wisdom in there. But if it's not accessible to them, shauri yako.
Good. Shauri yako, Dr. Wafula. I'm very sure as a publisher, you've been listening to what Dr. Tengatenga has been saying.
Yes.
How then do we get over all this? How are we able to address those issues that have been raised therein?
I think several ways. I think, when we talk about the book genres, there is the academic book genre. And luckily enough, in the academia, people will tend to read the books because they have no choice. If Dr. Ndavula or any one of us assigns an academic book to our class, then students have no choice but look for it. So in a sense, the academic book has a life that it can be able to survive, to live on, and to be usable. And so, at least from our perspective, when we write academic books, we also meet and encourage the professors in colleges to be able to use these books. And like Dr. Tengatenga says, unless it's used, it's going to be stashed somewhere in a library or a bookshelf somewhere, and nobody will even ever know Dr. Ndavula has written anything.
Yeah.
And so we always, like, he has written a story that all communication experts should be able to access. And so through his networks and through our networks, we reach out and we encourage professors. And he has said, John has said about the fact that this is a groundbreaking book in communications, which means that in his field and in relation to Kenyan electoral processes, or just in general African electoral processes or world electoral processes, all Kenyan communication students have been heavily reliant on books written by people in Europe and the US. But now here, finally, we have a book written by a Kenyan communications expert. And so we encourage professors to get hold of the book and use it, as we do with many other fields. Now, when it comes to popular books, storytelling, which is also a very important part of how we tell our African stories, the survival of a story is a little more challenging because it doesn't have the agency part of it in terms of using it, and so part of what we do when we and we haven't begun publishing popular stories yet, but one of the things that I think about as a publisher is to see how we can encourage storytelling and gathering communities where such books can be read. So in the Western world, which is a practice that I think should be done in Kenya, is when somebody publishes a book, they begin a book tour, just like musicians begin music tours, media tours.
Yeah.
And so I think that can become an avenue where people get to know. And I think when people get to know something and they get to know how nice it is, that's how they buy it. And so we're looking forward to find a way of incorporating those book tours where people can speak about what is out there.
What is out there.
Yeah, but I think I agree with Dr. Tengatenga that we have a huge pool of people who can read and want to read. It's just developing that culture of reading.
That culture of reading. And I also believe we have people who want to write and can write. We just need to develop that culture of writing.
Right.
And in the course of developing this too, Dr. Ndavula, in your capacity as a lecturer and a PhD holder in mass communication, there has been the belief and the school of thought out there that we never groom the young breed to take up writing and reading seriously, that there is an enormous gap when it comes to the quality of reading and writing even at the university level. What would be your take and response on this very school of thought?
First of all, I believe universities all over Kenya, for example, and developing countries should take courses like academic writing seriously. And I'm glad that university like St. Paul's University, we have academic writing at all levels, so that students are introduced to writing at a different level. You know, like in primary school and high school, you find that most of what you do is just writing compositions or essays. But then transitioning from that kind of writing to an academic writing, you know, which is suited to an academic audience, is a bit challenging. So if you have courses like writing courses which are taught seriously, you know, and given the emphasis they require, because sometimes such courses are common courses. So people, they have this attitude towards common courses, like maybe it's not really part of my curriculum. But if we're able to emphasize these, have material that people can read and engage with, and speak about it, then we begin to develop a culture of writing, a culture of telling our stories. Because if we don't write, then no one knows our story.
Sure.
Yeah. And on my part, for example, apart from teaching also academic writing, we hold seminars, that teach graduates or people who want to publish. We keep them with the skills to write. Just a mindset for doing academic writing, which is quite rigorous. You have to reference books, you have to read, so that you can produce something meaningful. And actually, I'd be drawn by this quote from, a doctor from Nigeria. I can't remember his name, but he said, if we read at least 10 books on a single topic, then we get to a level where we can begin to generate new knowledge. But if we do insufficient reading, then we don't create new knowledge, and that's what our society needs today.
That is exactly what our society needs today. We need to take a breather, digest what we've already discussed on this very set this morning. In case you're just joining us, welcome to the program. We've done quite a bit, but not all is lost. Trust you me, we got you back in as far as kickstarting your Thursday is concerned. This is Good Morning Kenya. My name is Samuel Njoroge. My colleague Wycliffe Gori is on standby, I believe, today for his Street Interactive. He's coming to us live from the Kenyatta International Convention Center. There you have him. That is Wycliffe Gori. I'm handing it over to him so that he brings us up to speed with how your morning looks like along the streets of Nairobi. And we shall be back in a bit to wind up this discussion with our able panel this morning. Over to you, Wycliffe Gori.
Okay, on air. So thank you very much, Sam, Safin, and Brenda. It's a very insightful topic of discussion that you are having there about the reading culture. I must say that while I was in the University of Nairobi, the same used to happen. We used to have very few people in the library. And the library used to get full, especially when we are heading towards exams. So it's something that we as Kenyans, we need to work on. So that aside, right now I'm at the KICC rooftop at the helipad, where we are going to give you live updates on what's happening in your streets right now as we speak. So one thing that I must say, this place is a beauty. It's somewhere that you really need to come.
Right, those are some of the beauties of having
one
a
thing
live
that I must
production.
say is that when you get here, you lose some sort of a sense of direction. But after
Yes, and we shall be crossing over to Wycliffe Gori in just a bit. As I told you, those are some of the beauties of live productions, and of course having Dr. Ndavula write books on communication, because emerging trends, as you can see right there, keep coming in over and over again. And I would like to cross to Dr. Tengatenga right about now. The ray of hope, the opportunities that lie ahead for writers, for readers, and as far as telling the African story is concerned, where do we begin? Where are they?
That's a fascinating question, because it's got so many answers to it.
Yes.
And one of the things I remember as a young person in secondary school was actually being inspired by those teachers who looked like they were my age. And here you are sitting next to your professor.
Sure.
And you think about it, what inspired me greatly, apart from the knowledge they were imparting, is that if he can do it, then I can do it too.
Sure.
And so the fact that you have programs like these, where people like Dr. Ndavula can come and talk about what they've done, and he said, well, I know Ndavula. We went to school together. Or he taught me. And so the excitement of seeing something being done by your own people somebody you grew up with, your peers and so forth. And I think that's where some of the hope is coming from. And for those of us that are old enough and have seen a little bit more, even to revive the stories of our heroes like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, as I did earlier on, and talking about Chinua Achebe, and even today we are getting excited about the younger writers. On my way here, I was reading an audiobook, listening to an audiobook by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So I'm reading The Purple Hibiscus, and he's talking about the stories about his family and so forth. And then I stopped for a moment. I said, guess who has written this? That girl from next door. That person I talk about. So that variety is the excitement that comes in seeing that there is that. So that's where the hope is. And the other element of hope is when people like us, because we're just one of many, many, many people who have done this. In fact, only a few days ago, we were honoring Professor Mugambi. The work Professor Mugambi has done for donkey years. So a number of his colleagues have written a book talking about him and talking about his works and appreciating his works. So when people do that, celebrate our own people in such events, in such writings, rays of hope. And then when you go to a university campus and all these students and all these professors gather together to enter into this exercise of how can we write better, how can we help each other and outdo one another in publishing and outdo one another in this. So that's that. And sometimes some of us are reluctant sometimes to talk about government processes. There may be some issues with government processes, but occasionally you get something that's exciting and benefits your cause. The whole requirement now that, well, you can't graduate from graduate school without ever publishing anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an imposition, but at the same time, that imposition generates the activity and generates the writing. And some people who never realize that they're actually good at something figure out that they are good at it.
Yep.
So those are some of the things that are very, very exciting that we can do that. So those are the rays of hope. And I think there is more, as I said, it's so exciting.
It's so exciting.
It's so exciting to do that and to
yeah.
see that. And those of us that are now in retirement, sitting around and clapping hands for the younger generation, you can just look at the ages here.
Yeah.
He is almost the age of my firstborn. And he is the age of my younger brother, many years removed.
Yeah.
And I have perfect mzee insignia.
And I'm probably the age of your grandson.
I didn't want to say it. Otherwise they would think you are just a little boy.
Over to you, Dr. Wafula. I'd like to come to you for your parting shot. Then we shall conclude with Dr. Ndavula right here.
Yeah, I think I should be able to say that thank you for inviting us to your space.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, because I think this is one of those many avenues that can put a word out there to encourage people to write. So we really appreciate your role in a way that helps us. So I think my parting word will be to encourage Kenyans to find avenues where they can write. There are a lot of people out there with a good heart and they want to help. And one of that avenues is Borderless Press. If anybody wants to write with us, we ask them to contact us. If somebody goes to borderlesspress.com or postcolonialnetworks.com, they will find our email contacts, and when they contact us, we will begin with them where they are, whatever stage of their writing or thinking about writing. we will be able to begin with them. So we encourage people to contact us.
Absolutely.
And we will be able to help them along the process.
All right. Dr. Ndavula, parting shot.
My parting shot is that, you know, communication landscape is changing rapidly, and we cannot ignore that. We have to try and engage and see how we can utilize this space. It's very, very important, and that's what I address in my book. Even those of us who think voters are still the same, voters are shifting, they're changing. We have a new generation of voters who just lived wholly on the internet, you know. We call them, you know, digital natives.
Yes.
And we need to understand them. So the more we read about this, the more we engage, the more we understand communication and use it effectively, you know, for the development of our society, which we really need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm looking forward to your next text, your second edition. It's bound to be very interesting.
I believe so. It has to.
if what is here is something to borrow into your second edition, all I can do right now is thank you, gentlemen, for coming to the show this morning, sharing your much needed insight as far as reading and writing the African story is concerned. We do wish you all the best in both your present and future endeavors. And thank you for watching the show this morning. We're sampling your tweets and what you've had to say about this discussion this very morning. So kindly, if the tweets are ready, we can display them so that we're able to share that with our viewers this morning. There
okay, so
we
are
have Yvonne Mihadi saying, yeah, and politics. That's Yvonne Mihadi right there. That question was answered, I believe. Another tweet, if we can. At Becky, you're saying watching from Kericho, very much inspired by the scholars in studio. Thank you so much for that, Becky. Do we have another one? I can't get, you say it's at Ajuoga. Yes, a very encouraging conversation. How can I access the book, Sami? We shall be letting you know how you can right about in a few minutes' time. Great. I'm told that is the final tweet, but before I link you up with Gori, who is now ready, up and running, Dr. Ndavula, where can they get the book?
First, the book is available on Amazon. It's available on Kindle, and we can also buy it at St. Paul's University Bookshop.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
St. Paul's University Bookshop. Thank you so much for coming. I leave you, though, with a quote from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she says, "A degree after 10 years is still a degree. A Mercedes bought at the age of 70 is still a Mercedes." And what's the inspiration behind that quote is that move at your pace, okay? You understand you better than anyone else. Otherwise, they cannot be with you unless they know